do that. Thanks everybody for coming to your Voice 306. This is our voice interoperability overview. I'm Jamie Stark, joined here by Michelle Gonsalves. We're going to go through and talk about a bunch of cool voice interoperability stuff with regards to Lync 2013. But before we do that, one of the things that if you've ever seen me present before, you know I do this, and I tend to ramble on about it for a little bit, so apologies in advance. But it is actually something that is super important for all of us at the conference, that we get your evaluations. We want to know if this works. We want to know if you want to see more of this, if you want to see less of this. So regardless of what you think of the content, regardless of what you think of the speakers, please just tell us. So that way we can help make the conference better for you next year, and hopefully the year after that. We look at these every night. I actually sent out a mail at 7 a.m. this morning to all my speakers talking about evals and talking about all sorts of different kind of logistical things. And we do this pretty frequently throughout the show in order to help our speakers adjust to to what's going on out there with everybody coming in and attending their session. So please, 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 you can do it on your mobile phone, you can do it on your tablet, you can do it on your laptop. So what we're going to do today is go through kind of 3 sections. I'm just going to kick it off really briefly and talk about, from kind of a marketing perspective, what are the interoperability investments and kind of how we think about interoperability in the Lync and Skype organization at Microsoft. Michelle actually runs, from an engineering perspective, all of our scale infrastructure interoperability programs, and so I'm just tickled to have her be able to join me up on stage. She's going to go through a lot of the great work we've done in the last year with regards to updates around interoperability and kind of what we're doing in the labs and the partners that we're going through and kind of improvements that we're making from a process perspective to be able to accelerate and improve the way that we're integrating through interoperability scenarios and testing and so forth. And then finally, I'm going to kind of spend the rest of the time going through a series of topologies around voice deployments. And this is fundamentally the, as opposed to the what of interoperability, it's the why of interoperability. So why are the different types of configurations that exist, what makes sense, and how should you think about it from a deployment perspective. Now this session is a 300 level session. We don't go deep into looking at SDPs or bypass or logs or any of those pieces. Adam Gent, one of our MVPs, is actually doing a 400 level session specifically on Cisco interoperability. So if that's something that you're interested in, please don't hesitate to go and check out his session, because he's got a full-blown Lync server installation, and he's literally like skipping all of the basics around topologies and interop and all that stuff and just kind of jumping straight into, let's look at logs and ladder diagrams and SDPs, okay? In addition, Michelle, Adam, myself, we're all going to be getting together at 4:30 in the Microsoft Pavilion at the booth, and we're just going to like have a powwow. And so we've got a bunch of big PPI boards there in the booth. We can draw all sorts of different diagrams on there. We can kind of go through and hopefully use some of Adam's lab and do a couple other fun things while we're down there, just to have a kind of open-ended conversation around interoperability or whatever, however you kind of want to drive that conversation. So the way that I look at interop with Lync is really across kind of 3 dimensions. Like, we've got a dimension around some industry alliance work that we do. We've got a dimension around how we document all the protocols that are used within the product. And then there's a dimension around making this practical for customers and partners. On the industry alliance side, these to me are kind of almost 3 to 5 year type investments, right, or activities, where we work with a cross-section of the industry to go and figure out, like, what are some really difficult, sophisticated interoperability problems that we can all get together and kind of agree, like, hey, this is a big deal and let's go off and tackle it. SIP v6, for example, is one that's really interesting right now in the UCI forum. There's a bunch of work on the SDN front that's happening between the ONF, the Open Networking Council, and there's a whole bunch of SDN sessions that are happening as well at Lync conference you can go and check out. And so there's a bunch of work on defining the interfaces for applications to be able to talk to networks. We do a bunch of work in the Wi-Fi Alliance. If you think about how chipsets need to be able to have their APIs open so that applications running through a mobile operating system can go and mark packets and kind of do more sophisticated things on the network, you actually have to start talking to Motorola and Broadcom and those folks, and then later on Apple, and yes, in fact, Google, and all of the other players kind of in the mobility space. Like, we can all kind of get together around the Wi-Fi Alliance and agree, hey, we should be a little bit more functional when it comes to having really great packet performance. On the protocol documentations, it's one of the things that I always joke that Lync is the second most open IP PBX in the market. The only thing we don't give you is the source code. We're not asterisk. But anything between a client and a server is completely documented, and it's documented out on this website of the Office protocol docs. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. And then the scale programs that Michelle leads up as a part of the UC Open Interoperability program. And this is something that we've had going on for a few years now. We're crazy proud of it, and we've now have kind of almost had this brand around UC interoperability where we've got tons of partners and tons of PBX systems and tons of IP telephony service providers engaging in this program. And all of these efforts really kind of come down to the fact that we spend a significant amount of engineering time and money and resources in thinking about and planning for interoperability. From a specification that PMs write into dev and test, and then down through sustained and partner engineering, there is a significant amount of effort that we put in to interoperability across the product. And I hope that part of this session is reflects that level of investment, and I hope that our activities, both from the scale programs that help partners deploy and from our activities in the industry, really highlight the fact that this is not a flash in the pan for Microsoft. I've literally been using this slide for the last 2 or 3 times I've given the voice interoperability presentation, because it is critically important to us that we allow customers to be able to take advantage of the infrastructure they have and remove roadblocks to taking full advantage of the great capabilities of Lync. And functionally, we think of interoperability as really a lead for deployment. So as I talk to my field and as I talk to partners, one of the things is we want to ensure that we have the right interoperability capabilities and programs and everything else in place. So that way we're removing roadblocks. A classic example is video interoperability, right? You heard about this at Lync Conference 2013. I'm still wearing the shirt. You saw it in Lync Conference 2014, right, at the keynote yesterday, that we knew that there are lots of customers out there who are like, boy, I really like these Lync room systems. If only I didn't have a sunk investment in 100 Tandberg units, that I still need to be able to work with the stuff that I have moving forward. And that's just key. And so again, this is something that you'll see from the video interop perspective, like the same types of investments across the industry, across our protocols, across our scale programs. The same sort of work is going to happen. The Office protocol documents, they're fun. I get a lot of questions around them. One of the things, though, to understand from a enterprise, customer, licensee of Lync perspective, this isn't consumable for you. I promise. And it's not because I'm trying to hide anything, because this is the sort of stuff that we talk about. This is from the H.264 specification. And it's wonderful. Like, I love to be able to know about the stream layout for the SCI messages and to actually be able to kind of block that out in, per the bits, right? Yeah, this same stuff that, when I was learning, Sona and ATM back in the day in college. Like I would look at ATM cells and I'd go like, oh, that's where the bits go. Okay, this is fine. But it's just not practical, right? We publish all of these protocols out there so that way third parties and partners can take on those protocols and can develop solutions on top of them. But then we have to have great scale interoperability programs that provide testing and that wrap all of these protocols and all these specs into something that's really practical for customers to then take on and deploy. And with that, Michelle is going to take us through what those interop programs look like with Lync 2013. So thanks, Michelle.
Me okay back there? Okay. So my name is Michelle Gonzalez, and I run the infrastructure voice interop programs to qualify our partners for our infrastructure ecosystem. And today I want to talk a little bit about, give a little overview of the program, and then talk about how the program has evolved over the past fiscal year and what we've done to enhance our customer experience and our partner experience. And in particular, the focus is going to be infrastructure devices for voice interop. So moving on to the next slide. Just wanted to talk about the high-level goals of the program. The main goal of the program is to ensure that our customers have access to high-quality devices that they can deploy in their deployments that are interoperable with Lync, and to enable an ecosystem of partners that compete with each other. We don't want just a few partners in every category, but an ecosystem that can compete and bring down price points and bring up innovation and quality. One of the other goals of the program is to ensure that our customers have access to various brand names and price points, and have our vendors have reach in various geographic locations where all of our customers are located. And the last point in this slide is actually one of the main goals of the program, is to, because many of our customers and many of the enterprises today have these legacy IPPBXs. We want to ensure that our customers are given the right guidance and the right config guides to have Lync interop with their legacy IPPBXs. And so we actually, Microsoft sponsors the testing and the qualification of legacy IPPBXs with some of our competing vendors like Cisco and Avaya and so on. So I wanted to just have a look at the 6 categories that come under the UC Open Interoperability Program. And as I mentioned, we'll be focusing on the infrastructure piece. But just to give an overview, it's a very intensive program. We want to make sure that all of our, all these categories are given due importance, and there are specs and test plans written for each of these categories. The apps are all of our integrated service vendors that build apps based on the Lync APIs for call recording, billing, and so on. The devices are all of our end user devices, like the IP phones, headsets, wireless clients, and so on. The infrastructure piece, we'll go a little bit more into the detail, but these are all of the voice infrastructure devices on the trunk side that enable connectivity between Lync and the carrier networks. The online dedicated is actually the Lync on-prem deployment that's picked up, and Microsoft runs this in their data center for select customers that want to avail of that service and not have to bother about deploying this in their enterprise themselves. So Microsoft hosts Office 365D, or the dedicated. It's just a name given to the on-prem deployment of Lync that Microsoft hosts. The services categories, again, the SIP trunk providers and the E911 providers. Up until late last year, the online dedicated program was a separate program for qualifying SIP trunk providers and ESBC vendors, session border controller vendors, for use in the online dedicated space. But we've realized that the requirements are pretty much the same, because they're both for on-prem topologies. And so we've, since last year, merged the two programs together, and all of our SIP trunk providers and ESBC providers that are qualified for on-prem are also qualified for online dedicated. So now there's a bigger choice of service providers and SBCs to choose from. And lastly, the video interop qualification program deals with interop with video gateways and VTCs and so on. So going into the infrastructure category, the first device category within that I wanted to talk about are the qualified gateways and IPPBXs. These are devices that our vendors come to us for qualification. There's a very high bar to be considered qualified, and you have to meet all of these requirements. These are the Lync 2013 requirements that have not changed over the last year. There haven't been any additional requirements added. The gateways and PBXs, as we all know, enable connectivity to the PSTN network through a pry line. The next category is the supported IPPBX category. These are all of our legacy IPPBXs, all our competing vendors that Microsoft actually tests in-house and publishes documentation and config guides. These are PBXs that may not necessarily pass all of the scenarios, but there are some caveats. But as long as the basic and most important scenarios work and the mandatory requirements are fulfilled, we consider these PBXs as supported, and we stand by our config guide that supports interop with Lync. The survivable branch appliances are basically a gateway and parts of Lync and the mediation server all in one box. And this device, also known as the SBA, is used at branches in order to provide connectivity to the PSTN when the WAN link to the data center goes down. So it helps you to have mission-critical voice calling capability even when your WAN is down. Another flavor of the branch survivability is the RBA, also known as the Resilient Branch Appliance. And this appliance is a little different from the SBA because it's a low-cost appliance, and it's meant mainly for smaller branches, and it uses 3G, 4G WAN connectivity to the data center as a backup. And so you can retain your data connection, and you can retain access to the data center, so you have access to conferencing. The downside of that is most customers I know have branches all over the world, and so 4G, 3G network is quite spotty. So are there customers here that are interested in the RBA concept or have thought about it, heard about it? Yeah, okay. What's your company name? Okay. Okay. Okay, so that's good to know. So we are coming up with the qualification program for the RBA. It's not widely adopted yet, but it's a very good replacement for an SBA, which can be a little costly for the smaller branches. And so our customers have the choice to use an RBA instead of an SBA in their small branches as well. Session border controllers are devices that enable connection to our SIP trunks, and they play a lot of other important roles. So the SIP trunks may not necessarily be compatible with Lync, so the SBCs actually bridge that gap and provide SIP header manipulation, transcoding, transport layer conversion from SIP over TCP to SIP over UDP, and so on. So we have a whole ecosystem of SBC vendors that we qualify under the program. These four categories are mainly the voice infrastructure devices, and the rest of them that you see are not necessarily voice related. They're more load balancers, reverse proxies. They're more for just general HTTP or SIP traffic. Reverse proxies is a new category that we've added to the qualification program because up until last year, we used to use the TMG, the Threat Management Gateway, for our port address translation requirements. in order to allow external Lync users to access all of the web services running on the front-end servers. But TMG is now end of life, and so we realized there's a gap that we need to fill. And so we came up with this program, and we've since then, over the last fiscal year, qualified 2 additional reverse proxies. One is the Windows Server 2012 R2 web application proxy, also known as the IIS-ARR. And the second is a third-party vendor, which is F5. They used to do load balancers, but now they've added the reverse proxy as a qualified device in the ecosystem. Load balancers are required mainly to load balance HTTP connections to the user's home pool. And customers need not use load balancers for SIP, but some of our customers choose to use it for SIP and HTTP both. So we have a qualification program for that as well. Our networking devices are all of our switches, wireless access points, and so on, and the virtual desktop infrastructure. So Lync has a VDI plugin, and all of the thin clients that are qualified under the VDI program use that plugin to interact with the rich client that's running in the data center, and customers can avail of cost savings and cost benefits by using a qualified VDI client and VDI environment. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what changes we've made in the program to enhance our customer experience. And so we've been working closely with all of our support channels and trying to listen to customer feedback, and we've looked at customer satisfaction when they call into customer support. And what we found was our support engineers used to, in the past, in FY13 and before, when a call came in, we'd work with the support. The support engineer would work with the customer, and until the issue was found to be, if the issue was found to be a third-party vendor issue, we would at that point close the trouble ticket and then ask the customer to work with a third-party vendor. But we realized we wanted to give our customers better service and better experience, so we decided that we'd educate our support engineers to better assist customers in working with third-party vendors. So we've added this requirement to the programs where all of our partners are required to provide training to our support engineers so that they are more informed and they can assist the customers until issue resolution. So now the customer is not left with the vendor to figure out the problem and the root cause. The Microsoft support engineer will be in the conversation, and they wait until the issue is resolved and then close the case. So in order to meet that goal, we've actually already had 4 depth partners deliver training to our support engineers, and we have many more partners lined up. One of the other enhancements I wanted to talk about was interaction with our competing PBX vendors. In the past, we've always had strategic alliances with our competing PBX vendors, but we did not use them in the infrastructure interop space. But in this last fiscal year, we've really been working together with our competing vendors and trying to come up with solutions for our mutual customers to unblock our mutual customers. So that's an area of enhancement. Last Lync conference, there was no legacy IPPBX qualified with Lync 2013. We've added 2 to the list. We have many more coming up in the pipeline. And as I mentioned, we've been talking a lot more with our, yes?
What are the 2 vendors you are?
I'll go to that in the next slide, but it's all posted on TechNet, so you have access to that. So the next comment I wanted to make was about being able to interact better. We've been interacting better with our support channels and listening to all of the issues that are coming up in the field and trying to tailor the program according to that. Frequently seen issues, and we've actually addressed gaps in the test plan because of these issues. One example that I can think of is we used to see a lot of customers calling in for calls after 30 minutes that were put on hold and getting dropped. And then we found that it was related to the ROC counter not being updated or the TLS SRTP keys not being updated after the ROC counter was rolled over. And so we've added the cases like that to our qualification program, and we've seen a slight reduction in the number of cases that keep coming up that are already well documented and so on. So that's an improvement there. I already touched upon the reverse proxy program that we added last fiscal year. So this slide is actually my favorite slide because it shows very well about the qualification going on within the program and all of our partners coming back to the program, qualifying their existing releases and requalifying newer releases, and also new partners being added to the program. So this graph shows the last 2.5 quarters in this current fiscal year. We're still in the current quarter, and we have a lot more partners lined up, but we've added about 25 new SKUs to the voice infrastructure devices ecosystem alone in this last fiscal year. So that's a considerable improvement from last year. And what I want to share is that we're seeing a lot of traction, a lot of interest. Our customers are reaching out to our partners for qualification. They're deploying Lync. We are unblocking deployments. So this is really great, and we're seeing more of this, and we want to see more of this. Some of the enhancements on our partner-facing side, we've been listening to our partners as well. There are some pains that they feel during qualification, and we've been trying to tailor the process to improve the qualification process for our partners to make it easier for them. And what we've done is there were several cases that were redundant, that were not really needed, several bugs in the automation tool that we've addressed, and we found that it has brought down qualification time by about 12% on an average, which is a big improvement from last year. So hopefully our partners will see that, and they're already seeing it because these are numbers we've actually got from our certification labs that qualify our partners. So somebody wanted to talk about the legacy IPPBXs. So I just wanted to share the two versions that we've qualified so far are the CUCM7 and the Avaya SM6.1. Now you'll say these are slightly older versions. Why not the more later versions? And we are working on the later, newer releases of the Ciscos and the Avayas. We've encountered some problems with interop, and we are working together with our competing vendors to come up with a solution for our customers. So that's the reason why you don't see the later versions of the CUCMs and the Avayas, but these are in progress, and we want to let the customers know that we know that you want these, and we are working on getting this out there. So I just wanted to share the partner ecosystem. These are, again, all of our infrastructure voice devices, device partners. Some of them have products in various other categories besides, not just a single category. So we've added, these are our Lync 2013 partners, but they were also partners in 2010. In 2013, we've added a Taltel, which is an ESBC vendor. Sangoma was a gateway vendor, but we've added them in the SBC program as well. They have qualified devices. Ferrari Electronic, again, was a gateway and an SBA vendor, and now they also have qualified SBCs. F5 is not a voice-specific infrastructure partner, but I've added them to the list because they were only a load balancer partner, but now they have qualified reverse proxies as well. So with that, I wanted to hand off to Jamie, who will talk a little bit about how these qualified devices are used in various topologies and what are the requirements that customers have.
I was noticing a couple folks who were whispering around for questions. We do have a few minutes. If everyone had any questions on kind of where we are from an interop programs perspective, the only thing that I ask is that we are recording this for posterity's sake. And so there's a wonderful little microphone in the center of the room that in all likelihood is off because the sound guy has left the room. And so maybe someone could try it out, and then if it doesn't work, I could repeat the question. But if anyone has any questions, please. We've got a couple minutes, and we can take them now, or we can hold them to the end. Yeah, I guilted you into it. I appreciate it. Hey, the mic's on. Yay.
It works. So if you can go back to the previous slide when you spoke about Avaya, the two PBXs, the one before that.
Yes.
Yes, supported. See 7.1 and Avaya SM61. What does it actually mean, interrupt status?
Well, supported is...
What does that mean? In the practical scenario, if you have a customer that has a whole bunch of these legacy PBXs, and they want to implement Lync,
we have a config guide that lays down all of the config changes that you need to make on your Avaya and on Lync in order for both of them to work in your deployment. So we have...
When you speak Avaya, you speak Nortel as well as Avaya? Because
No, this is just the Avaya SM, the Session Manager 6.1.
Yeah,
what about...
this is Avaya Blue, not Avaya Red. Or I'm sorry, Avaya Red, not Avaya Blue. Yeah.
It's Avaya Red. So, and those documents are available where?
On TechNet.
And what would they be listed as? Config notes for legacy
Yes.
PBXs?
Yes.
Exactly. We can't do the config notes on every PBX. In some, like, as much as we can, we try to at very least provide a set of information that's, hey, these are the things that we've tried. This is what works. This is what doesn't. What supported means is that you can call Premier, right? You call Premier and say, hey, I've got Avaya 6.1. I'm plugging it into Lync 2013, and calls don't work, and we'll be able to prosecute that. If you had I don't want to defame a vendor, so if you had Stark PBX and you plugged that into Lync 2013 and it blows up, our support wouldn't be able to help beyond any kind of very basic, like, all right, let's make sure that your trunks and everything else are configured correctly, because we don't know. Maybe they don't adhere to the standard the right way. Maybe they do something goofy in the meantime. That's what the series of interop testing is designed to uncover.
So just to go back to that interrupt doc, that includes the requirements that you need to configure on whatever that, let's say, the Avaya PBX,
Yes.
as well as the necessary test sequence as well, or not? It just really, you got to create your...
It doesn't list all of the tests that were run because they are standard and they don't change. All of our devices have to meet all of those requirements. But if there are certain things that are not met, we list them as caveats, as certain corner cases not working, or else everything works and everything's tested. So that set of configuration that's listed in the document is what makes the interop work, and anything other than that might break a few scenarios. Or
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Absolutely, thank you. For those in the back, there are seats over here in the corner too. It's all good. So the question was, is the interoperability with the PBX or is the interoperability with the session manager? What we're testing our interface to is the Avaya session manager. What happens from that point forward in the Avaya call control space, we don't necessarily care about. So there could be a PBX behind that. We could be egressing out to the PSTN. Was I accurate in
yes.
that? Okay.
We just qualify the next hop that talks to the Lync server.
Have you a timeline for the reverse proxy solution provider like Camp, like Citrix, like every other that have a load balancer today, and also the provider says we can use reverse proxy, but have you a timeline that's have for tested?
The question was around the timelines for additional reverse proxy testing. I'll first talk to the kind of just the general supportability of reverse proxy, and then I'd love for you to jump in on kind of what our queue looks like. First, this one's personally difficult for me because I look at a reverse proxy as a standard piece of networking equipment, right? So like we don't uniquely qualify Wi-Fi chipsets. We don't uniquely qualify switches, right? We'll qualify kind of broader sets of network infrastructure from Juniper and Brocade and Aruba and things like that. But to me, kind of standard pieces of networking equipment, web servers, should just kind of act like they should. And reverse proxies have generally fit into that role in the sense that if you have a reverse proxy, 9 times out of 10 it works. Unfortunately, that one time out of 10 can be really, really painful, number one. And number two, we could be a lot better at providing more granular and specific instructions on how to configure the reverse proxies with Lync. And number three, we can be really complete, right? There's a bunch of cases where an RP will function fine with doing, address book download or, kind of basic web services, and it'll blow up when you do mobile, right? Because of cookie persistence or some other issue. And so as a result, that's kind of why we built out the reverse proxy program. It's an open program. Anyone's welcome to play. We've got a test spec. If you're a partner, come on down. And we're more than happy to supply the spec and help you out and do the testing and get you up on the website.
Yeah, so if there are reverse proxy partners out here and are interested in knowing more about the qualification program, I'm definitely happy to provide some guidance there. We have Citrix lined up as a reverse proxy provider. Of course, it depends on whether they are able to deliver all of the test cases and whether they qualify to meet all the requirements. But we are adding some more partners as well, and we can't disclose right now. But we definitely have other load balancer partners that are interested in reverse proxies as well. So you can have the load balancer and reverse proxy running in a single box, and you don't have to deploy separate vendors and separate devices.
And it kind of makes sense from a topology kind of config perspective to do that. The one thing that is a little bit different about reverse proxies is that generally support has the facility to kind of, because again, standard piece of networking equipment, there's not quite as much of the playing around with HTTP as there is playing around with the vagaries of SIP, right? And so you find that more often than not, that is something that we can work with and we can kind of step through configs, but generally our support organization doesn't have the kind of detail, this is how you configure random third-party reverse proxy out there. Does that help answer your question? Yeah? Cool. Are we good? Is there more? Please use the mic. Come on, you can do it. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Since last year, we have upgraded our session managers to 6.3 in Europe, Asia, and the US. That works well. We didn't have any issues. I have another question on remote call control between Avaya and Lync. That was working in 2010 and is not there anymore with 2013. Are there any plans to bring that back?
So that is a good question.
Indeed it is. I love talking about remote call control. I can never get away from it. So thanks for the information about 6.3. It's great to hear. And again, it's something like we just want to be complete because when we put PBX up on the website, we expect support's going to get calls. We want to have all the right background information and test cases and documentation, everything else in place, so that way we can help you out in case something does happen. But it's great to hear that it's working clean. And you know what? We kind of expect this, right? We expect this in 8.5 and 8.6 on Communications Manager and 9.9.1 as well. But we've got a huge set of tests. And out of hundreds of tests, if a couple of them fail, that's something that we want to go and prosecute with Cisco and go and figure out why. In some cases, it could be something goofy on our side. In some cases, it could be something goofy on their side. But we go and we figure it out together because it's the right thing to do. And it's not easy. It sounds straightforward, but it's not easy, clearly, considering the position that we both hold in the industry right now. About remote call control. Look, we've never had a qualification program for the TR87 spec that's used to implement remote call control. TR87 is the SIP, CIST over SIP, effectively, sending the CTI messages over a SIP link. We've never had a qualification program for it. It's effectively has not changed since 2005 SP1. It is still supported, though, in Lync 2013. We had this conversation yesterday in my call control session where we're just not seeing a lot of RCC out there much whatsoever. But in the cases that we do have some customers that are still using RCC and are changing their PBX backend, yeah, there could be some stuff that changes the PBX backend. If there's stuff that's changing in 2013, we'll support it because that interface is still supported. While that is said, that interface is still supported, we are not investing in that interface at all and haven't been for the last few years and have no anticipation of go-forward support for RCC, right? We think that there's a lot more interesting and sophisticated call control scenarios that we can bring into future releases of the product and potentially by doing so, we can obviate some of the need for scenarios like remote call control. I love answering that question. It's all good. I get it every year. Appreciate the questions, though. Any others? We good? All right, cool. Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just it really is phenomenal to see the level of growth in the program over the last few years, and how disciplined we have become as kind of a scale test organization, not just across the kind of voice infrastructure pieces of PBXs and session border controllers and gateways and so forth, but also all the other ancillary pieces as well, and really trying to think about, hey, let's try to solve this in a scalable manner instead of trying to solve a particular problem in a one-off fashion. Maybe it's the maturity of the product. I don't know. It's pretty nice. So what I want to do is spend the last few minutes that we have together talking about different ways to use some of the core interoperability testing that we've done and kind of ways to apply it, right? So if you think about the interoperability as a Swiss Army knife, like there's a whole bunch of different tools here that you can take advantage of that functionally appear as different topologies, right? And one of the most fundamental questions that if you're just kind of starting off on your voice journey with Lync, one of the most fundamental questions you have to ask is, how am I going to have ingress and egress to the PSTN? And there's ultimately, I'll give you the answer right now, and the answer is however you want. But we're going to spend the next 45 minutes kind of talking through all the different potential scenarios here, and functionally it can kind of break down to, from a business perspective, it's really, really common to have the PBX/telephony/networking team say, oh, you want to bring in this Lync thing and kind of test it out. That makes sense because, Microsoft voice, it's scary. You'll have to reboot your phone, blue screen of phone death, whatever. So we want to bucket it and kind of put it into a box and shove it off into a corner and functionally sit it behind the PBX. It's just a really kind of common kind of first impression. And that's not to say that that's necessarily wrong for the goals that you have with regard to deploying Lync voice, but that's clearly not the only potential option. And so what we're going to do is just kind of talk through what some of the other options are for egress and connectivity out to the PSTN. We're going to talk through some of the PSTN scenarios first, and then we're going to talk through some of the PBX scenarios second, and kind of go through bypass and session management and a few other cases. And so what I kind of offer is that connecting directly to the PSTN, effectively being a parallel piece of call control infrastructure to your existing IPPBX system, has some compelling reasons to go in that path. One is that it's really well known and it's really straightforward now to go out and you can literally walk the halls here at the expo hall, go find any number of sponsors here who have any number of different types of connectivity options out to the PSTN, from AudioCode and Sonos and many others that are here. In addition to that, using a gateway to go and terminate a circuit, you can also use those devices as an SBC to go and connect up with an IP telephony service provider. And in addition to that, you can use those devices to go and talk out to you can go and talk out to an IP telephony service provider directly as well. But one of the things that's really kind of compelling about this is that it is pretty easy. It is pretty straightforward to have this direct connection out to the PSTN. I'm not having to go and make any changes out to my PBX, right? My PBX has its existing calling domain. Lync has its existing separate calling domain. I'm able to kind of go and get this up and running lickety split. A lot of customers that are doing PSTN connectivity for conferencing are going down this path, right? One of the reasons that they're doing this is that if I'm just dropping a set of DIDs in for a PSTN bridge, then it's no big deal. I'm not having any of the impact of somebody's numbers changing. One of the potential fallout scenarios of this is that you either, if you're going to be doing Lync for end users, one of the potential fallout scenarios is that you may need to go and provide additional or new numbers for your users. One, because having your carrier up there at the PSTN flop over a single number or number range from the PBX over to Lync can be difficult and time-consuming and fraught with error and pain and frustration when you've got to go and submit ticket after ticket because they keep on not quite getting it right. Now, I'm not saying that this happens all the time. I'm just repeating some of the stories I've heard with customers that, yes, indeed, this does have some issues. You may need additional capacity, right? If you're not running the numbers clean on what your calling volumes look like, you may actually be adding trunks over to Lync and not necessarily subtracting trunks off of the PBX as a result. Calls that are internal, calls that are going from one calling domain to the other, in this case, need to flop through the PSTN. It's fine if you're a big company like Microsoft, you beat the hell out of your telephony providers every year or 2 years from a telecom expense management perspective and get lower and lower, call rates through the PSTN, but that may not be, depending upon your kind of call volumes, that may not be the best case for you if you have a lot of calls going between those two calling domains. The numbering thing's interesting, though. I've talked to some customers that are like, listen, it's almost easier from an adoption and deployment perspective to say, congratulations, we are now doing a completely new thing for enterprise telephony. You're going to be leaving your old phone behind, and with your old phone, you're going to be leaving your old phone number, and so we're going to give you a new headset and an upgraded workstation with Windows 8, and at the same time you get a new phone number, a new business card, and they kind of package it as like an HR benefit thing almost, right? And from a cost perspective, I've had some customers come to me and say, listen, the kind of OA&M and management side of this to actually deal with moving stuff from a carrier perspective is just too much of a pain in the butt, and I'd rather just buy another 10,000 or 50,000 numbers and then just kind of deal with it from that perspective. So it's a little bit of a there are a few things to think about in here, and it is a little bit kind of up to how you want to consider your rollout, right? But connecting the PSTN via gateway, again, we've been doing this since 2007. Our gateway partners are really, really solid and have been working with us now for multiple iterations of our stack. I understand, of course, gateway is going to connect some type of physical interface. Generally, this is a pry line, but it can be T1, E1, Melcast. It can be any kind of goofy circuit switch protocol that you can think of on the one hand, circuit switch protocol and country homologation on the one hand, and SIP on the other hand. And from our perspective, what we really care about, what Lync really cares about, is that connection between mediation servers, external egress or external interface of its B2B UA connecting up to that gateway. So whatever's on the other side of the gateway, it could be IP over avian carrier. I don't really care. That is an actual RFC if you haven't actually seen that. It's all good. Like, as long as the gateway is going to take care of that, handle all the right timers, then that'll work out just fine. It's really well understood. You're not going to have the kind of dependency of putting telephony over packet. Of course, you get lots of choice of carriers because everyone's really familiar with doing circuits. You can move the same over packet as well, and I really feel like we have gotten to the point from an IP telephony service provider perspective that this is now kind of here with a giant asterisk, if here being the kind of first world, right? I used to put up a table in talking about IP telephony service providers that every single conference I would get more and more providers on the slide, and now I can't fit the slide and respect your eyesight at the same time. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 different IP telephony service providers that we've qualified with Lync. This program has gone crazy. Now, granted, not all of them have qualified for 2013. That many of them have gone through the kind of requalification process to be able to take their qual from 2010 and move that up to 2013. Again, the way that we're describing this here from the diagram perspective is to use a VPN and to nail up that VPN over to your IP telephony service provider. Similarly, if your IP telephony service provider is also giving you MPLS, no worries there. You can run SIP trunking over that MPLS link as well without having the nailed up VPN. Similarly, you can take that infrastructure out and you can put an SBC in there. Really common configuration these days, and there's actually one that Francois brought up yesterday in our kind of call control panel session, where as he's seeing kind of, now granted Francois kind of works at the high end of the scale of our customer range, but he's seeing lots of customers think about those third-party SBCs as kind of the single kind of call control point, and then from there they can kind of fan off into all the different calling domains that this enterprise may have. And by having a third party, meaning, you know, Acme Oracle or Sonos, AudioCode, and so forth, you're not going to get into a big kind of vendor, I was going to use an inappropriate term, a vendor arguing match, so to speak, between kind of SIP homologation and other types of topics. You know, so that is a really kind of common approach at our larger end, where you've got some Cisco, you've got some Avaya, maybe you've got some Siemens spread around Europe, and at the same time you want to think about Lync. You can put that SBC in there at the kind of head end, and then have it go and kind of manage calls and kind of distribute things down to each of those different calling domains. That's not the only way to do it, though. Just so you know, like, it is pretty common for our partners to characterize the use of SIP trunking with the need to purchase an SBC, and that's not the case. You can absolutely go and deploy SIP trunking with Lync without having to deploy an SBC behind it. But regardless of what you decide to do in connecting out to the PSTN, just, you know, you got to run the numbers and make sure that the stuff is clean. You know, so I kind of talked about this before, customers using direct to the PSTN for conferencing, for example. Those are some pretty straightforward calculations, right? You kind of know what your existing conferencing workload looks like. You can kind of run those numbers. If you're doing Lync for voice, you're connecting to the PSTN for Lync voice, you're going to have some different behaviors going on here, right? You're going to have more people potentially simul-ringing out to their mobile phones. You're going to have a little bit more of that PSTN traffic on the one hand. On the other hand, if today in your PBX architecture you have calls egressing between calling domains using the PSTN, meaning if you have an architecture that looks like this but across multiple PBX platforms, maybe today you're sending a bunch of calls over to the PSTN that you wouldn't necessarily need to do if you have everybody deployed with Lync in your environment, and they can use peer-to-peer calling to be able to reach one another, right? So just by the factor of deploying Lync into your environment, that gives them another opportunity, it gives them another calling path, and so that could potentially also then kind of adjust what you're going to see in your volumes. But regardless, Erlang B is your friend. I remember Erlang B way back in the day when I was selling IVR and speech recognition systems. It's a wonderful piece of math with all sorts of fun symbols that, thank the Lord, you don't have to go and know about anymore, because we have a bandwidth planning tool that's available out on TechNet. Go out to your favorite search engine, type Lync bandwidth planning tool, and you'll be able to come up with a fancy Excel spreadsheet that'll help you with the math. But you still, you know, from a kind of business perspective, you still need to run the numbers, still need to do the math. I was connecting out to the PSTN. That was my little pitch, that connecting out to the PSTN may not be the kind of worst case scenario that folks are thinking of. I just think that a lot of times we come to we come to the question of deploying Lync Voice from the perspective of, I'm going to connect up to my PBX, and how do I go and think about that? And I just offer out to you guys, have that first thought of, does it make sense for us to go and do that? Or should we think about connecting directly to the PSTN? Because connecting to the PBX, it is by far the kind of most common thing. It is what folks are really familiar with. It's probably the way that you brought your Cisco into your environment or your Avaya into your environment when you had an older circuit switch to PBX, right? PBX is going to own the numbering plan. Users still get to keep their number because the PSTN is still going to route that number down into your calling domain, and then once it's in your calling domain, you can kind of mess with it from there. But why, all good reasons here, right? You're going to benefit from your existing infrastructure. You're not necessarily going to have to change a lot of trunk capacity. Calls between calling domains, not going to pay for them because they're not going to egress out your infrastructure. But there are dependencies on the PBX side. One of them being, if you're going to be using direct SIP, you want to make sure that PBX has been tested and qualified and or supported by Microsoft. You may need to add some trunks into that PBX. If it doesn't support SIP and you need to have it connect up to a gateway, we'll kind of talk about through that scenario. One of the things, though, that I'll offer here is, think about not just the deployment that you're doing next. Don't just think about the 100-person pilot or the 1,000-person, our kind of test bed for Lync Voice. Really think about, how does the step that you're taking now ultimately accrue to your long-term step that you want to take in the future with regard to Lync Voice. If ultimately you're already kind of thinking, hey, this is going to be our path, we kind of think that this Microsoft stuff is going to have some legs within our organization, and then perhaps it makes sense to start taking initial steps that accrue to that, so then you don't have to tear out all of your infrastructure once everyone in your organization says, yeah, we actually like this Lync stuff. Let's go ahead and let's kind of go big with it. But as I've alluded to, there are a couple ways you can connect out to the PBX. One, of course, using direct SIP that Michelle and I kind of talked through. This is where the egress interface and mediation server is connecting directly to a qualified or supported IP PBX. Of course, you also have the opportunity to use a gateway, whether that gateway is acting as a circuit-to-packet transcoder or that gateway is acting as a packet-to-packet transcoder, generally what we would consider as an SBC. Kind of either way, either way, from a gateway perspective, again, we're just going to care about whatever that interface is the mediation is going to connect up with, and what's on the other side of that gateway, it's kind of whatever to us. What's on the other side of that PBX, it's whatever to us. It's all good. In this example below here, we've got a kind of old school TDM PBX, but I just want to offer, again, you can have these devices intermediate to whatever. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk through and prove the fact that this is actually a 300-level session is to actually go through how we think about direct SIP from a kind of trunk and topologies perspective. And for those of you that are going to be joining Mr. Adam Gent, who's sitting up here in the front row in his 400-level session later, hopefully this will provide the right level of kind of fundamental basis when he starts throwing up high-end ladder diagrams and going through and debugging SDPs. But functionally, the way that we define a trunk now in Lync 2013 is this tuple, right, of my mediation FQDN and port and my gateway FQDN and port. What this allows us to do is have lots of flexibility in the way that we're setting up trunks between the mediation process in Lync and my IPPBX or my gateways. And it just has tons of accrual. It's going to accrue to media bypass, to the capability for a client to instantiate a direct media connection to either an IPPBX, an MTP that's running in a piece of networking gear, or a gateway or an SBC. What that means is the Lync clients we'll set up a direct media connection to kind of the shortest path out to the PSTN, which is always something that we want to do. It's always something we want to take advantage for. It also gives us a lot of great resiliency features and some other advantages as well. For example, with SIP trunking, and so in the diagram on the right there, you can imagine I've got two separate sites, but I'm going to connect up to the same IP telephony service provider. In previous releases of Lync, you could do this, but it was kind of a mess to set up, and it was kind of annoying because we didn't have a definition of a trunk in the same fashion. Now, we can uniquely identify each one of those connections between my mediation pool and my session border controller that's head-ending my IP telephony service provider because of the combination of the trunk being the mediation FQDNs, and those two pools are going to be different, right? So what this allows us to do is in our global topology, I can ensure that these two trunks are set up and configured uniquely, and the Lync is going to treat them uniquely even though they're egressing to the same head-end SBC. Coffee. In addition, it gives us some capabilities here from a resiliency perspective as well. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that if you want, you can actually set up kind of different series of ports to be able to connect up to different gateways. Here in this example, I've got two different gateways, Gateway F and Gateway G. And the idea is that my mediation server there down at the bottom, I may want to be able to split calls between those two different gateways. They could egress to the PSTN the same. They could egress to the PSTN with different, calling costs. Maybe one gateway is in one region, one gateway is in another. They could egress to the PSTN as kind of primary and backup. But the idea is that I can set these up and I can kind of treat them differently from a trunk perspective. And the way that they're defined uniquely is that even though for mediation server D I'm using the same port, I'm actually using a different FQDN for those two different gateways because they're two different physical devices. So because that combination of mediation FQDN port, gateway FQDN and port is different, I can treat those trunks differently. Again, this is a pretty significant difference from the way that we thought about things in the 2010 time frame. Kind of looking at it from a PBX perspective. Again, I associate my mediation server with egress out to the PSTN. PBXs are a little bit unique in this case because in a lot of times the PBX doesn't have the facility to be able to identify and be able to handle the FQDN-based routing, be able to handle TLS and SRTP. All of our gateways and all of our SBCs have that functionality. But what we find is that with the PBXs, we do have to be able to have some more flexibility and step back a little bit at our standards compliance and not just assume that they have the facility to be able to take this on. So as a result, what you end up with is instead of having a single listening port on mediation connected to a single listening port on the PBX, you actually define a trunk across a whole bunch of different ports on those devices. And one of the things that we'll talk about here in a little bit, in addition, is kind of policy for call control. My configurations and my trunk policies can be applied either globally on a per trunk basis as well as my dial plan. My dial plan can be scoped globally. My dial plan can be scoped per trunk. One of the things that this brings up, though, is how to think about being able to do media bypass, being able to have direct media connections between my clients and an IP PBX when my IP PBX doesn't look like a big monolithic box like this, right? It's really, really common to be able to have, I'm just going to build this out. And am I done? There we go. It's really, really common to have my IP PBX implemented as kind of a set of signaling resources and then a set of media resources. And this is important because when we go and do bypass, we can't necessarily set up a media connection to a signaling resource. It doesn't make sense. in the Cisco parlance, this is called a media termination point, or an MTP. And it's really common that when you're in a branch, you're going to have a set of ISR routers that are running in your branch, and those ISRs are going to have spun up on them MTPs to be able to handle media locally in that branch. And Lync wants to be able to, we want to be able to take the same advantage of that resource, right? So the idea is that, for example, here on this branch here in the lower right-hand corner, if I've got a set of PBX extensions that are running in that branch, and I've got a set of Lync resources in there, I don't want to have to trunk my media all the way out of the branch and then all the way back in, right? What media bypass allows us to do in this branch scenario is set up a media connection out to that MTP that's sitting in the branch. So my signaling is going to go from mediation server to PBX to the PBX extension, but my media is just going to go between that PBX extension and the Lync client. And the way that we do that is with this alternate media IP address. And so when you're going and you're configuring your trunks, the way that you set this up is that you configure your trunks first to that MTP using the alternate media IP address, the MTP1, and then for each successive MTP that you want to support, use the successive alternate media IP address. And then it's interesting. I think that we call them two separate names as well. So you'll see alternate media IP address, I believe, in the GUI in the Lync server control panel, and you'll see representative media IP being used in PowerShell, and functionally they're going to refer to the same things. What this allows us to do is be able to have a topology where we see signaling going to our signaling processor, going to our PBX, but Lync knows that we're going to go set up media, and we're going to set up media to the network domain that's represented by that blue box in the lower right-hand corner. And I know that I'm going to go and set up a media connection through the trunk and use that MTP that's sitting in that branch office. And this will be, I promise, my final plug for Adam's session, because he will actually go into excruciating detail from a signaling perspective on exactly what all this stuff looks like. I'm just going to do a quick check on time. The last piece I'm going to talk through just really briefly is around session management. This is something that's fairly new with Lync 2013, and again, think of it as just another arrow in the quiver you have to be able to apply towards more flexible configurations between Lync and your IPPBXs. The idea here is that you can use Lync as an intermediary between calling platforms or between a calling platform and the PBX without having that call terminate on any particular Lync endpoint. And what's cool about this is that in addition to having all these kind of flexible routing scenarios for PSTN to PBX, PBX to PBX, and so forth, you actually have the facility to be able to policy and to be able to do some call management as these calls are moving through the Lync system. So we're not trying to be as fancy as an Oracle/Acme here. We're not trying to rip apart the whole call and do a bunch of transcoding and do a bunch of very atomic manipulations of SIP headers. But this is something that comes with the product for free, so I thought you might want to take a look at it and then decide, do I want to have a fancy SBC, or do I want to just try to take a shot and use the kind of built-in capability that Lync has? And so in this example, I'm a PBX user, and I just want to be able to egress out to the PSTN. So effectively, what's kind of funny about this is that it turns the tables on the scenario that we just talked about earlier, right? Here, in this case, instead of Lync sitting behind the PBX, now the PBX is sitting behind Lync. We're the big man on campus. Not saying this is something that you necessarily need to do, but it's an option from a configuration perspective. That the way this is going to work is that the PBX is going to send its call over to mediation. My FE sees that this call is ultimately destined out to the PSTN. So I'm going to set up signaling out to the gateway or IP telephony service provider, SIP trunk, SPC, whatever the case may be, that egresses out to the PSTN. But because we have media bypass enabled here, I can set up a direct media connection from the PBX or from wherever its media resource is direct to that gateway. What's nice about this is that I could still have the same level of PSTN usages and routing and translation rules, kind of other call processing that's going on in order to authorize this call and to send it out. So I do have some level of facility within Lync here to be able to say, hey, no, don't egress this call. Yes, I want to egress this call over this trunk versus that trunk, depending upon where it's supposed to go for least cost or location-based routing. Similarly, kind of the same idea, I could do this between PBX systems as well. Functionally, from our perspective, it doesn't really look any different. Here in this case, I've got mediation servers that are each terminating specific trunks to PBXs. That doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but we designed this diagram, this example in this way to show that yes, indeed, you're not going to have media be doubly transcoded between these three different calling platforms. The source PBX, Lync, and the destination PBX, media will flow through directly, and we'll nail that up between the two PBX systems, and we'll just be in the path for media to be able to, again, apply call policy. Kind of diving into a little bit of the number translation side of how this operates. So as an administrator, I can apply a whole bunch of different translation rules to my trunk config. I can do this regardless of whether I'm doing the kind of session management facility or I'm just having kind of plain vanilla egress out to the PSTN, right? So this kind of steps through that process where call comes into my inbound trunk, I find my PSTN usage, it points to my route, it goes out to my outbound trunk, and then when I hit my outbound trunk, I get the number translations both for the called number that I'm making. So if I need to make any changes for the local calling conditions of that number, I can go and I can make those. Or if I need to make changes to the calling number. So for example, if you've ever gotten a call from Microsoft, you see that every single time we call out on the PSTN, comes out as 425-882-8080. Handy trick, you could use that at any Safeway and get a cheap discount without having to get a Safeway club card. But every single one of our calls egresses out PSTN that way because of those trunk configurations that we do. With the calling number translations prior to routing that call. So there's just a whole bunch of kind of tools that are available to you when you're thinking about whether or not to connect connect as kind of a parallel to the PBX, connect behind the PBX, and there's probably another 4 or 5 different topologies that I've kind of talked through here in this presentation that are all kind of derivations therein. And fundamentally, my kind of silly answer to the question here, fundamentally what I just offer is that take the time to kind of explore all of these options. Take the opportunity to really kind of consider, maybe it makes sense to sit Lync parallel to the PBX. Maybe it makes sense to take advantage of some of Lync's session management facility. Maybe, you kind of listen to these sessions here at the conference and you think, boy, I really still have a lot of convincing to do to my PBX guys back home. So I really think we want to first take a really kind of easy, kind of straightforward approach. Have a couple hundred users, sit them behind the PBX, and then kind of make a plan going forward. But fundamentally, take the opportunity to go through and evaluate all these different options. And if you want to have some additional discussions on this, don't hesitate to stop by the booth. 4:30 today. The 3 of us will be no. Oh, the expo hall closes at 4:30. So be there earlier. I think we'll try to be there around 4 o'clock then. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Reach out to any of your other speakers. Happy to take questions, but you're going to have to use the microphone. And with that, we are right at time. So I'll hang out and I'll take questions. But thank you all so much for hanging out. Coming to the first session of the day. You're all rock stars. I hope to see you all bright and early as well tomorrow morning after our party. And please don't hesitate to submit your evals because we care and we read them. So we'll do questions from there.